Hello, everyone. Welcome to NFL Inside the Lab. We are here to discuss NFL Week 7 injuries. We'll talk about some projection changes, and then, as always, we'll take some of your user questions at the end of the show. I am joined by Ian and Freeman, as I am every week. Guys, let's dive right into it. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and we're going to talk about some of the notable injuries, and there are some ones that really are affecting the slate this morning. Ian, let's start with Jacksonville Jaguars. Leonard Fournette confirmed out. Chris Ivory seemingly going to move into the workhorse role for the Jacksonville Jaguars. What are your thoughts on him, his role in this matchup?
Yeah, so we've already gotten confirmation Ivory will be starting. No surprises there. I think the big question is whether he's walking into a three-down role or if he's going to end up kind of being in a committee with TJ Yeldon. Considering Yeldon's been a healthy scratch all season, they've actually trusted Ivory a bit more with a passing role, I think, than maybe people would otherwise expect. So maybe not the 20, 25 carries we've been seeing from Fournette, just ruthlessly pounding the middle, but Ivory's going to be that early down back with a definite chance to play a few more pass downs than people might be thinking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts on Ivory? Is he a guy that can catch any passes, or do you think they'll bring in Yeldon for that? And what are your thoughts on his price and sort of like is he just a guy you have to have in cash now?
Yeah, I think he's pretty much a must play. I understand if people – I don't know if they're sort of locked into roster construction and if they like values at other positions and maybe they're hesitant on his ability to get the ball all that much, then fine, I get it. But a lot of sharp people are going to just be jamming him in cash games because of the value he provides. Yeah, he's a three-down guy. He's had pass catching capability his whole career, even though he hasn't always been used that way. He's a big guy who can score near the goal line. I think they actually are going to want to use him basically like a miniature Fournette because it's just a one-game thing. He can't do that over the course of a season, but for one game, yeah, and they just want to run the ball as much as they can, and it's not as if the Colts are really all that good in run defense. So I think it's a smash spot. I think he's basically a must-start in cash.
Yeah, probably on both sides too. He's 4.8 on DraftKings, 5.9 on FanDuel. So just so cheap. All right, let's keep on moving here. Let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. Not huge news, but we did get confirmation that DeMarco Murray and Delanie Walker are going to be playing. Ian, what are your thoughts on just the backfield? I know Derrick Henry was getting some buzz. We assume that probably that's going to slow down with DeMarco. But what are your thoughts on just this team? Obviously, a juicy matchup against the Browns. We probably want some Titans.
Yeah, it's definitely tough backfield to figure out. We had this situation earlier this season where DeMarco didn't really practice all week. They're going to a tough spot against Seattle, and he ended up balling out and basically working as their featured back. So even though we would assume that, with a bulky Murray and Derrick Henry kind of coming on lately, that he might take that role, there's really been no reports to suggest that, and it's just more of a guess than anything to try to predict who's going to end up leading that backfield. Other big news from this game, though, is we got Delanie Walker active. He was dealing with a calf injury this week, but he's good to go against the worst tight end defense in football. And that tight end defense might even be worse than usual this week because their free safety, first round pick, Jabril Peppers, is out, as is Jason McCourty, the number one cornerback. So Browns have actually been pretty terrible against everything this season, but definitely worse against the pass. So if you're having some second doubts against that backfield, there's plenty of options to exploit elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many options on this team. Eric Decker, Rashard Matthews, probably underpriced. People were really talking about the backfield, but yeah, some of these pass catchers are interesting for sure. Walker, the Cleveland Browns have just been like, if there's a tight end that's even like kind of can catch a pass, like you play them in DFS. And Walker's intriguing because there's no Gronk on the DraftKings main slate. So Walker is like the high price guy that you have to get up to in GPPs. What are your thoughts on all of the Titans options, Matt?
This might be contrarian, but I'm a little bit off of Delanie Walker. And I know it's like the great spot of going against Cleveland, but for some reason, the Titans really haven't prioritized Walker all that much this year, and he's priced up. That's the big thing. In comparison to the production that he's had, he is priced up because of the matchup. So that's the one area where I would be a little hesitant about this. And I'm also hesitant about DeMarco Murray, even though he's active. They have been getting Derrick Henry involved earlier in the game. And then when they've been ahead, they've been using him later in the game as the hammer. So it could be a situation where they just don't use DeMarco Murray quite as much, and Derrick Henry really becomes the guy that they rely on for this game. But Rashard Matthews, Eric Decker, yeah, great matchup against a really wounded secondary.
All right, so quick poll. Who has more upside, Derrick Henry or DeMarco Murray-Friedman?
Oh, Derrick Henry.
Ian, you agree?
Derrick Henry.
Yeah, okay. Just making sure we're all on the same page here. Let's keep on moving. Let's move to the Arizona Cardinals. What's going on with Andre Ellington, Ian, and just this backfield in general?
Yeah, Andre Ellington's out, and he only played about 20% of their snaps last week, but that was kind of a unique game because we saw the Cardinals basically jump out on Tampa from the beginning and play with a big lead all day. Looking like, they're underdogs, slightly worse game script potentially. So it's looking more like Kerwin's going to take that Ellington passing down role than Adrian Peterson taking 100% of these snaps. We'll see though. And, Peterson did walk in there and play 75% of snaps and look great regardless. But I think we should still temper our expectations and realize that Ellington isn't really a true backup running back. And it's more likely they would take one of their backups and sub him in for Ellington's plays than Peterson just getting everything.
Yeah, Matt, what are your thoughts on just how usage is going to break down here? Arizona was up so big early on, which gave Adrian Peterson amazing game script. He got 26 carries, as 3-point road dogs. It seems, not road dogs. I mean, they're in London, but not at home in their 3-point dogs. What are your thoughts on Peterson? Probably going to see a lot, probably worse game script than he did last week.
Yeah, I still think it's a pretty good spot for him. That doesn't mean I would be playing him in cash, and I think some people might be tempted to do that on account of what he did last week. And then also the matchup going against the Rams, who are allowing the most fantasy points in the league to opposing backfields. And it's not as if a lot of that production has come through the air. They've given it up on the ground. Most rushing touchdowns to opposing running backs. Most yards on the ground, with the exception of the Chargers and Jaguars. But really high up there in yards on the ground allowed to opposing running backs. So even if game script is still fairly decent, I think they want to get him the ball a lot because that's the success that they had last week. So
fair enough.
I don't know. I understand tournament exposure to it. I think that's definitely warranted. I think it gets worse for him after this week with the games that they have coming up. But this week is still a pretty decent spot.
Fair enough. Let's keep on moving here. Let's go to the Carolina Panthers. Ian, what's going on with Kelvin Benjamin, and what can we expect from this offense against not a bad Chicago Bears defense this year?
Yeah, Benji is good to go. He was missing some practices earlier this week, and Panthers even said they were concerned about his knee, but he's active. But yeah, you said it. We've seen the Bears really have some success against wide receiver ones for the last year and a half. And the teams that have been able to kind of overcome that have usually almost had more of a field stretcher at their number 2 spot to take some attention away from the number 1 receiver. With Funches and Benjamin, both kind of that same big body possession, throw it up type of receiver. Not sure that any of them are really going to demand the extra attention that could open one or the other up. But yeah, we'll see what they're able to do against his secondary. Like you said, they've been good at home all year, and we've seen some reverse line movement going towards the Bears this week.
Friedman, what are your thoughts on this game? Not a really enticing game from a DFS perspective. It has a 40-point total, which is one of the lowest of the week. Carolina is just a slight favorite at 2.5 on the road here. Who are the interesting plays that we're looking on in Carolina, if any?
I mean, there's really not much to say. I guess you can look at Cam Newton, and he's been the number 2 fantasy scoring quarterback over the last 3 weeks, ever since his resurrection against the Patriots. So that is something, and he can, start to get it done with his legs. He's doing a little bit more as a runner, and then he's also looked pretty good as a passer. So he's a guy who's interesting, especially since he can spread it around to so many different weapons. But that makes some of his weapons all that uninteresting. So I don't know. I would go with Cam if you're going to go with someone from this game, sure. But I don't think you need to go with anyone from this game.
Yeah, that's fair. Ian, are we getting Khalil back at center today?
Yes, Khalil is back from his neck injury, so that helps.
Yeah, helps a little bit.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, not a good offensive line so far this season, but maybe that helps just a smidge. Just quickly, probably not a huge injury, but since we're on this game, Benny Cunningham out. Matt, this is probably very, very contrarian, but does it boost at all interest in Howard, who's getting massive work, and even maybe Tariq Cohen, who would get all of the passing work now?
Maybe a little bit, but not enough to speak of.
Fair enough. All right, let's go to the Chargers here. Ian, what's going on with some of these guys? Keenan Allen, Melvin Gordon were guys that we were looking at as far as their injury designations this morning.
Yeah, so the report out this morning is that Keenan will be playing. Same thing with Melvin. Melvin's injury was not just a shoulder ding. They weren't really expecting him to be in doubt of playing all week long, but Keenan is actually banged up a little bit, so it's worth wondering how many snaps he'll be playing. It's a tough matchup for all these receivers against his secondary. Obviously, pretty sure no one's had over 65 yards on them yet this season, and Gordon's going to once again likely be in this 3-down role where he's also kind of almost doubling as their key receiver. So definitely think Gordon and Hunter Henry, who we've seen have a season high in snap rate last week, have a chance to kind of attack that middle of the Broncos D.
Yeah, Freeman, we know the no-fly zone, elite defense on the outside. The way to attack them is in the middle. So are you, like Ian, on Gordon and Henry as the guys to target for the Chargers today?
Yeah, the Broncos last year were 5th in pass DVOA against tight ends. This year, I think they're 30th. So they've really regressed in that area. Hunter Henry is definitely the pass catcher you want to target. And then obviously Melvin Gordon. It's a tough matchup in terms of running game, but Gordon has had success against the Broncos in the past as a runner. Going back to last year, he's gotten a lot of volume against them, and then obviously a good receiver, and then could get work at the goal line. The Broncos are yet to allow a running back to score a rushing touchdown. That at some point has to change, and that could definitely change with Gordon with all the goal line usage that he gets. Keenan Allen scares me in this matchup because he's injured and he lines up primarily in the slot going against Chris Harris Jr., who's one of the best shutdown corners in the league, amazingly doing it from the slot. And then when he has to go outside, he might have Aqib Talib on him. So it's not a great spot for him. I think we're probably a little too high on him in terms of our projections.
Yeah, definitely a scary spot for sure. Yeah, Melvin Gordon, 20 targets the last 2 games. Guys just getting massive volume. All right, let's just touch on a couple just quick more notes here. Jameis Winston, Ian, what's the notes on him?
Jameis didn't throw this week until Friday, but he's going to go out there and give it a shot. We have no word on how limited he is and what his arm is like. So traveling to Buffalo, definitely need to be careful with how you're projecting Mike Evans and Deshaun Jackson, especially with EJ Gaines and Leonard Johnson both being active and playing for the Bills.
Yeah, and on the other side here, Jay Matsey looking like he's going to play.
Yeah, he's going to play, but he's wearing a special glove with like a splint over top it. He came back from this thumb injury about a week or 2 earlier, never won planned. So he'll be out there. We'll see if Tyrod can get some chemistry with him for once.
Yeah. So Freeman, in our Flex podcast and really all of our content, Tyrod Taylor, guys like LeSean McCoy, supposed to be very, very chalky, rightfully so against the Bucs defense that has just been atrocious. I guess the question is there really anyone else other than those 2 guys on the Bills that we're looking at?
I don't know. Jordan Matthews is interesting going against that defense that's horrible, especially McClain as the slot cornerback who just got burned last week by Fitzgerald. And he's been burned all year. So Matthews is slightly interesting, especially because they don't have Charles Clay to basically function as the slot receiver in the middle of the field. So I think Matthews has that opportunity basically to work as sort of like a move tight end type for them. But I mean, and he is cheap. So that's one thing that's enticing. But other than that, I'm really not sure.
Fair enough. All right, let's do one more here before we get to user questions. So definitely go ahead and get those in. Just shoot them into the chat, and we'll pull some interesting questions. Less start and sit stuff and more. If you have questions about matchups, injuries, stuff like that, we'd be happy to answer those before we get out of here. We got about maybe 5-10 minutes left here. Let's go to the Vikings. Ian, what's going on with all of these guys here?
Yeah, so we have both Stephon Diggs and Michael Floyd out. So Adam Thielen is locked and loaded as their wide receiver 1 again. Expecting to see Laquan Treadwell on one side. And if they're just so light at wide receivers, we'll probably end up seeing a bunch of Jarius Wright too. Worth mentioning, this is a much tougher matchup than this offense has seen in the past few weeks. So not going to have a light group of corners to go up against with both Jimmy and Lardarius Webb active. I think it's also just worth pointing out that this Vikings offense with Case Keenum on quarterback had that big explosion against the Tampa Bay during his second start, but since then they haven't been able to score over 23 points. So he's exceeded expectations, but still need to kind of keep in mind that the ceiling of this Vikings offense might not be as high as it will be with Bradford and Diggs.
Fair enough. Freeman, what are your thoughts on the Vikes? Another not a great game here, 38-point total. So may not be a whole lot of fantasy goodness here.
Yeah, so I agree with Ian's macro take, but I still think there's actually a pretty high amount of goodness for Thielen and Rudolph. And I think it's a good spot because there are going to be people who are off of this game because of the low total. Thielen with Jarius Wright and Laquan Treadwell as like the guys competing for targets with him. Like it's fantastic. He's going to get a lot of work. And Lardarius Webb hasn't been all that great this year in terms of PFF grades. I think he's below average. And then Kyle Rudolph is actually the guy that I would be most interested in. The Ravens are dead last in the league in pass DVOA against tight ends. They've allowed the most receiving touchdowns to tight ends. Rudolph gets a lot of his action within the red zone. That's what you're looking for from him. He has 6 red zone targets this year. I think he had like 28 or 24, a really high number last year. And then in the games since last year in which he's been active and Diggs has been inactive, he's had, I think, around 9.5 targets. So it's a good spot for him as the number 2 receiver on this offense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we saw what Mercedes Lewis did to the Ravens in London with Blake Bortles. So Kyle Rudolph, definitely has some high upside here. All right, let's get to some questions. It seems like 2 games that people are really trying to figure out. And ironically, it's some games that we're seeing some pretty heavy line movement on, the Green Bay Packers and the New York Giants. Let's start with the Packers. Obviously, we have Brett Hundley getting the start here, and he has a lot of weapons. I guess the question is, do we want to target them against the Saints defense that's looking better, and do we trust Brett Hundley to get it to him? Ian, what are your thoughts on this offense going today?
Yeah, we've kind of seen the industry come around a little bit on Brett Hundley throughout the week. I definitely see the reasons why. He's an elite spark athlete. He's been with the team for multiple years, so he's had time to, learn the system. He's not just coming off the bench and being thrown in the fire. But at the same time, and everything that people think is wrong with this guy is he holds the ball too long. He takes too many sacks. These have been issues going back to UCLA, and now he does get this improved Saints defense. We've seen that blitzes more than almost anyone in the league. So I know he's at home, and Adams and Nelson are, pretty good set of wide receivers to be thrown to for your first start, but wouldn't be surprised if the Packers kind of realize that Aaron Rodgers isn't back there anymore, maybe run the ball a little more. And like you said, tough matchup with those corners. So.
Right. Yeah. Freeman, what are your thoughts on this? I think this is one of the teams that I've seen a great sort of divide of opinions among even sharp players, you having differing takes on the Green Bay Packers. What are your thoughts?
I like it. I mean, we've seen a backup quarterback with the Packers have success before in Matt Flynn a few years ago when Rodgers was out with the collarbone issue. So I think it's possible. I think Mike McCarthy, while not being a good in-game manager, is probably a good guy of thinking about a game plan that fits his backup quarterback, especially like if he has time to come up with that plan. So I'm okay with this spot actually for Hundley, especially because he has upside as a runner. He has mobility.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot that they could do with him that they probably wouldn't do with Aaron Rodgers anymore, even though Rodgers does have mobility. So I think especially because he's fairly cheap, there's a good amount of upside here, way more upside than there is with Tyrod Taylor, even though Taylor has the better matchup, similar price, probably higher floor. He just doesn't have the weapons to throw to. But it is entirely possible that Hundley could have a 300-yard passing game with 3 touchdowns because he's got the receivers to do it.
Yeah, fair enough for sure. All right, let's talk about the Giants here. This one's getting some buzz, rightfully so, probably on Twitter. The Giants 8-point dogs going against Seattle Seahawks moved all the way up to 3.5 today. So really just so much line movement. Anytime you get a 4.5-point line movement on Sunday morning, I mean, just massive. All right, so let's hop back into our matchup space and discuss. I think people are surprised because, I mean, like the Giants have no receivers and they're going against the Seattle Seahawks. So, Matt, what do you make of this?
Well, I think it's just part of it is that the Seahawks defense is not as good as it used to be. You have the Giants at home. I know the Seahawks are coming off of a bye, but there has been some research done showing that sometimes teams coming off of byes, especially if they're traveling towards the East Coast, and I think that's something that's factoring into this, but how they can be a little bit sluggish if they're coming off of a bye. I don't know. I think that can cut both ways, though. They could be more rested or they could be sluggish, whatever. But I think there's just a lot of small little factors that ding the Seahawks. And then 8 points just seems like a lot for a team that has had some issues with consistency.
Fair. Yeah, Ian, what are your thoughts on that line movement and maybe guys that we would target with some of that line movement? It's like probably Evan Ingram, and that's about it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we did. I mean, I'm not ready to say that this Giants team is a world beater after they, kind of went to Denver and got that big win Sunday night, but we saw a brand new offense really out of them. McAdoo finally gave up his play calling to Mike Sullivan, their offensive coordinator, and they proceeded to pound the ball for really the first time in the McAdoo era that we've seen. I'm not in love with Orleans Darkwa, but the guy is cheap and basically took over as their RB1 last week, and they got their first win of the season. So we know they don't have wide receivers to throw to. The Giants seem to know that too. So doesn't seem like they're likely to test the Legion of Boom. And if we got a game that's the Sharps are saying it's a lot closer than it's going to be, could end up being a lot of opportunity for Darkwa against a defensive front that we know has been susceptible to run this year.
Good calls here. Got a good question here. I think we sort of missed this in this game here, but we'll talk about the New Orleans Saints as sort of a pivot away from the Green Bay. Are we worried about the rain? Projected not great weather in this game. Freeman, is that any concern to you? Or are we dinging people because of the projected rain, pass catchers or receivers alike?
So there's been some research on this. Rain isn't nearly as big of an issue as wind, and it doesn't look like there's going to be a lot of wind in the game. So I'm not dinging it too much, especially because I think it's possible that other people will overreact to the weather. So I think it's basically you play them as you normally would. One thing to keep in mind, though, Willie Snead is not active in this game. So that's something that we hadn't talked about that people might be thinking. And so maybe some more goodness for Michael Thomas. And Brandon Coleman is the guy who's going to be getting most of the action in the slot.
Yeah, and Ingram and Kamara definitely projected to still be popular as they were. For sure. I don't think anything has changed there. I get some questions about some of these Denver guys. So let's just talk about them quickly. We talked about the other side of this. Some questions about the backfield, what we expect there. It's been sort of up and down, sort of all over the place with their three guys. And then Demaryius Thomas, obviously a heavy workload last week. What are our thoughts on him? Ian, do you expect him to get Hayward shadow treatment? And just general thoughts on this offense?
So Hayward hasn't really traveled into the slot this season. The Chargers run almost more zone than basically anyone except the Steelers. But, he has shadowed and followed Thomas over the past few seasons, and Thomas hasn't been able to score a touchdown yet against Hayward when he's on the Chargers. But, shadow coverage, I just think we sometimes consider that like man-on-man for 60 minutes, and that's probably not going to be the case today. With that said, though, I think it's worth pointing out that the Broncos are down their third-string right tackle against Melvin Ingram and Joey Bosa, and Simeon is dealing with this bruised shoulder or collarbone and he had basically the same exact injury last year, and his yards per attempt dropped by about 1.5 yards after he started to play hurt. So definitely some other injuries other than just Emmanuel Sanders that could have an impact on Demaryius' play today.
Sure. Last question here before we get out of here. Matt, a lot of questions. There's a couple intriguing, I guess how you define that word, quarterbacks at the low salary spot. Beathard, and we have Hundley and Tyrod Taylor. What are your takes on those three guys and Beathard especially?
It's interesting. I think Beathard is going to be the guy who's kind of ignored out of that trio because Hundley has the upside and the kind of sexy matchup with, like a high scoring game. Taylor has like the proven record of being a Konami code guy who has really high floor. And I think out of those two, they will probably be the preferred options in tournaments and cash games. And so I think Beathard could actually be a pretty good pivot, especially because they are the biggest underdogs in this slate. And, will probably have the ability to throw the ball, the necessity to throw the ball, but then the ability to throw the ball against the Cowboys. So I think Beathard is actually pretty interesting. And I mean, I'm going to do a Twitter Q&A right after this. So if there are any more questions, I can hit on them.
Yep. Sounds good. Ian, before we get out of here, Beathard, who we pair him with, Kittle or Garcon?
Yeah, it's got to be his old college roommate, George Kittle. They're still boys from then, and we've seen Kittle play well this season. I think we all know by now how good of an athlete he is. So whenever we can get that college chemistry, throw into a guy with actual real life upside to make some plays, gotta love that. Also worth mentioning, during the Niners' little comeback against the Redskins last week, Beathard kept feeding Pierre Garcon even with Hoyer out of the game. So Garcon will probably continue to be their wide receiver one with Beathard, and Kittle can step up as well.
Gotcha. Maybe a double stack is in line here for tournaments. All right, sounds good. We're going to end it there. Beathard, Kittle, Garcon double stack is the perfect brand way for us to end the show at Fantasy Labs. So we'll end it there. Good luck, guys, in week 7, and we'll talk to you guys next week.